appreciate everybody coming out. I think on your schedules, it's not easy to get anything in, and public meetings are difficult. But thank you everybody for coming again. I'm just going to introduce myself for anybody that wasn't here last night. Spike Shepherd, PMSI. We're project managers, planners, and owner representatives. The architect that helped us with the courthouse piece of it was Mike Conley, with Architura in Indianapolis. The jail piece of it was put together by RQAW and Doug Carter. He was also the former sheriff for Hamilton County. He knows a little bit about holding people in behind bars. And sitting on the front row here is Gary Malone with Umball. He brought the financial piece to this, so we put together a team that we think is the best in the state to look at these things from their particular point of view and their particular expertise. Everybody on this team, these parts are their expertise. So before I get any further than that, is anybody that was not here last night? Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a handout here that was, okay. Who else? The slides that we went through last night. So you have it?
Can I get that in electronic form? Can I get this in electronic form later?
Yeah. Okay. We've actually got the PDF.
Okay.
And so, if I get this crazy thing going here, Doug tells me I got to figure it out. Down to the end of all this. Okay. Last night what we covered was just kind of a recap. We covered the demographics of both the county and the jail population. And for those of you who weren't here, remember the county population is going pretty static. The jail population is not. It's not uncommon. We see that trend all across the state. And we looked at the building assessment and deficiencies for both facilities, both the courthouse and the jail. We went through those in pretty in-depth. And we looked at some new facility advantages on the jail. We also looked at the improvements that could be made on top of what you've already done on the courthouse. And the point we made last night was a good job has been done on the courthouse to date. But there's a few things that still need to be addressed, and there's some things that can be done to improve this to make it work a lot better, particularly storage of records, and also with the circulation of the building, ADA compliance, and just general circulation, and cleaning up office spaces with using some other techniques than desks that are 120 years old. Anyway, so we talked about all that. And then we come into the jail, we looked at the facility staffing, what impact that had on it, if you recall. To add on to the existing jail could increase staffing as much as 8 people, depending on how that happens. But on a new facility, on a new site, actually the staffing doesn't change at all. And we talked about, on the jail, we talked about a need, an absolute need right now of about 50 beds. And so we looked at a projected long-term need of 100. Is that the right number? Don't know, but we know it's not 150. And is 75, the question is 75 enough for long-term, or do we need to go a little bit higher than that? The magic of that is you can do this, you can observe and staff the same facility for 50 people as you can for 100. You can even go as high as 150 or 200 on the same staff, by the way the jails are being constructed. Then we looked at some site, because obviously there's not a site issue with the courthouse. It is where it is and has been for a long time. But we did look at site options for, and we took a hodgepodge of different types of sites to see what kind of impact would be on that. So now all the information about all that's in that handout that I just gave you. And we are prepared if you've got any questions, or if you want to go back and look at any of that, we'll do that right now before we get in. Because what I intended to cover tonight at the end of this is what's it going to cost, and what are the opportunities and options being able to pay for. With that said, is there any questions or any comments from last night's discussion that you thought about during the day, or you talked about it at coffee shop?
I wasn't here last night, but there is another option for a site. I have 5 acres on this side of town that I've not discussed with anybody else.
And here's what happened with site selection. We looked at different types of sites and what they would impact. And if they decide to say, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to kind of start all over with that site thing, because you know what, there's going to be other opportunities coming around. And so we go back and look at all those. And I remember one project, we looked at 27 different sites. I don't really suggest you go through that agony, but they wanted to, so they did. And they, there's lots of opportunities, and I think it's to the county's benefit to look at. And some advantages and disadvantages. Anything else?
Spike, I think it might be helpful if you would bring some of your pictures up of the new jail,
Okay.
pictures of it and the pods and so forth, and just kind of explain briefly how that works.
We'll let Doug do that. I think what we probably ought to look at is briefly some of the deficiencies of the jail. And
I'm going to turn these lights down so you all can see these clearly.
Okay, I think.
Thank you. I'll get through these pretty quickly. Last time we should spend about 45 minutes or so. Don't stand in anybody's way here. So we'll slide through these pretty quickly. In order to get the number of inmates, let's go back to this slide right here. This slide is really important. We were able to go back and get pretty accurate data from June 2010. The blue line here indicates the number of jail beds that are currently available, and that number is 28. That are currently in that facility. It was built in 1888. It was added on to in 1983. The green line is the minimum. Over here, the index is the daily population of the lowest jail population. This is the mean, or the one in the middle, that indicates the average, or the ADP, the average daily population. The red one is the highest population, and this blue line is really important for those that weren't here last night, because it indicates classification inefficiency, and that's kind of a strange word, but in essence what that means is if you anticipate your maximum jail bed population being at 85% of your capacity, that allows for proper classification of inmates when they come in. And if you don't have that 15% cushion, you don't have the capacity to properly classify those inmates and properly place them in the facility, either pre or post adjudicated, which means they've either been through the system and sentenced, or they're awaiting that system preference. So you can see the trend line here, since about December of 2010, it's continuing to creep up and creep up and creep up. Spike had mentioned the Tipton County population. The trend line is headed down, but it appears to be sometime in 2012, between 2012 and 2015, it's going to straighten itself out. And these are simply projections. We believe that history is a pretty good predictor of the future, and that's how those trend lines are established and determined. Certainly subject to change, and we certainly hope that they start to go back up. Time will tell. Okay, so some of the deficiencies. Certainly the number of inmates exceeds the facility's rated capacity, which creates all kinds of problems, from very initial entry of that inmate through that process of adjudication, however long that process may take. The building certainly met the building codes of the time. I don't know what those were then, but I'm sure that they did. But as we've moved through nearly a century and a half, they don't meet the needs today. An example, this is the handicap shower. You can see it would be virtually impossible to get a wheelchair in that particular space for the inmate to take a shower. In Hamilton County, I was responsible for about 400 inmates on any given day, and those inmates that have handicapped needs are really, really problematic. Is probably not the right word, but a challenge would be the correct word. The capacity there is not to house a handicapped inmate. We talked a little bit about the square footage of the existing cells. The square footage is considerably under what is recommended by the ACA, the American Correctional Association. Those are not mandates. It's important to understand that. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that they are, which means you have to do this. We certainly suggest you do, because in the event that there is a problem in this facility, we'd much rather defend meeting this A standard than not meeting them at all. So the square footage per inmate is important. Generally, that square footage, generally speaking, is 50 square feet per inmate. And you can see that we're considerably under that. This particular cell, when I was there a couple weeks ago, you can see there's room for 3 inmates. There's another one sleeping right there, so there's actually 4 inside that space. So that takes that square footage down even further than if it was maximum, adds maximum capacity, not over. These photos indicate, let me back up just for a second. There's a requirement of outside light for the inmate population, particularly if they're in their cells more than 10 hours in any given day. Inmates in your facility are in their cells more than 10 hours in any given day. This is the only exterior, or the only light in the facility, with the exception of the small light above the laboratory. This light has not been operable in a long, long time. There's some electrical problems in there that it just simply can't be fixed. So there is no opportunity for any outside light anywhere in the 6 blocks of the facility, 6 individual cell blocks. This photo is indicative of the HVAC system currently that's in the facility. That door is propped open with a book. The reason for that, for those of you that have not been in the facility, and I would highly recommend that you do take the time to get hold of Sheriff Moses and stroll through the facility. There's a corridor that goes this way, and there's one that comes this way. In essence, there's a block of hallways around the 6 pods. These doors have to remain open, and the reason for that is for air movement. If they close these doors, you literally will bake inside the cell blocks. If they leave these doors open, it allows that air to circulate into the cell blocks and then dissipate up through the ceiling and through the roof structure of the existing building. This area is indicative of a janitor's closet. The problem with that area is it's about a 6 by 8 room that also houses 2 washers and 1 dryer for inmate laundry. Picture on the top is a current control room for the facility of adequate space. It's a fairly good sized room. At one time it housed the Sheriff's Dispatch Center, which was right where the indicator light is. Since that time, there's been some thought, and I commend everybody that participated in the thought of consolidating dispatch services before the state mandated it. So the dispatch center is no longer there. This console also doubled as a backup to the jail control pod, or the jail control console. The problem with time is that the current structure, with the exception of the recording device, which is really pretty good, and it could be transferred to a different facility. This control panel is being supported with parts from this one because the parts aren't accessible anymore. So there's going to come a point in time where this is going to be virtually inoperable. This control panel, there's one of these outside of every pod in the jail. Again, there's 6 in the current facility. In order to evacuate the facility, with a fire, a gas leak, whatever it might be, a person would have to actually physically come to this control box, release this lever, get those inmates out of that cell. Real serious problem. I had to evacuate 414 inmates on 3 separate occasions in 8 years. And all of them happened between 2005 and 2006. And all the planning in the world, it's incredibly complicated. And fortunately, it all worked out okay, but there were a lot of reasons for it not to. This photo is the electrical mechanism that feeds one of the pods. Each one of the 6 pods has this configuration. It's a power source and a cable supply to the TV inside the day room block. One of the most problematic portions of the jail, with the exception of the inability to release those inmates electronically, is this corridor, in my opinion. This is the corridor that houses the inmate processing. It's where the inmates come in. This is an interview room. The nurse's office sits back in this corner. And this is where moms and dads and kids and grandparents and friends come to visit inmates. They'll walk down this hallway and turn right into a small vestibule, and the inmate will be brought into the only other vestibule in the facility, and they'll sit with glass between them and be able to visit. There is no opportunity to really manage that population that comes into your facility. There's no way to really at all to search them. There's nowhere for them to put their clothes. There's nowhere for a 3 or 4-year-old to sit while mom or dad is talking, whatever it might be. Very problematic. So there's a lot of activity in this particular hallway. This is a closed-circuit television. It was probably a very high-tech device at its time, at its peak. Currently, this unit sits outside of every one of the blocks that you currently have, outside the access door to the block itself. The problem with this technology is it only captures about 60 or 65% of what goes on inside that cell. And every one of those inmates knows that. They know that there's a blind spot, that there's a cone coming out of that closed-circuit television, and everything to the right, everything to the left is not recorded. There's not a bigger liability in your county than the county jail. And it's all fine until something goes south, and then it's really problematic. If this is inoperable or doesn't capture what goes on inside that cell, it creates a significant problem for your community. The photograph at the top is where the inmates are processed, right around the corner from this view. Again, you can see the space. That's about a 4-foot hallway, I suspect, and there's a lot of activity in and around there. There's no break as a countertop, as an example, between the inmate being processed in or out and the one correctional officer that's there dealing with that particular inmate. It's all fine until it goes south or until multiple inmates come into that area, or a person in here has a problem with an inmate, and that officer has to decide which place do I go. We talked a little bit about classification of inmates, and this is what this represents. There really isn't one currently because there's not the capacity or the space to be able to do that. So the classification is they do the very best they can to keep violent inmates together and those non-violent offenders separated, and then the women in a separate area. And hopefully somebody won't come in that's got some type of a disorder that's going to cause them to possibly become violent. And obviously it happens a fair amount, particularly when you put people in a small space for an extended period of time. The capacity to deal with medical situations that inmates have is just about non-existent. Mental illness is certainly an issue in any facility in the state, whether it's large or small. The number is relative. Bigger is not better, and those numbers are always relative, always relative. So oftentimes you could have probably do have on any given day somebody with some form of mental illness interacting with maybe even a non-violent offender. There is no capacity at all for any juveniles to be housed in the current facility, and they must be housed in a specialized unit. Currently, for those who weren't here last night, those inmates are taken up to Howard County or Hamilton County. Real-time observation is really important of the inmate population today, and oftentimes the records from courts dictate to us and to you as a community, as community leaders, what kind of facility you should have. Fortunately, the word is not shall yet, and I hope it never becomes a shall. I hope it always stays a should. But again, really important. I'd much rather defend against an issue that have a plan rather than not have one at all. Okay. I talked about the interview room just very briefly. This is the interview room off that corridor that I said was so problematic. This is the law library for your inmate population. You have to provide. You are required by law to provide an inmate access to a law library. It can be an electronic version, it can be a laptop, it can be a library like this with actual books. This is a bit antiquated, that's not done much anymore. Currently what has to happen is Sheriff Moses needs to have an officer take an inmate into this facility, into this interview room. As long as there's not an official interview being done in that room, they have to monitor that individual to either go through these books or provide a laptop to that individual person. There's all kinds of requests. They are creative souls with what they request, what they ask for, copies, binders, supplies. That list can go on and on, and it can be very, very time consuming. And so that is not a very conducive environment for that particular thing or the technology associated with providing that necessary piece to your inmate population. This kitchen is not much larger than most residential kitchens. I'm not sure how they do what they do in there, but they do. And they do the very best they can. But the capacity of this kitchen is very, very much antiquated. There are hardly no inmate programs. One thing I learned with an inmate population, and I didn't understand it when I first took office, I was a state policeman before that, was managing that inmate population. You have a very attentive audience while they're there. And you almost have a duty and responsibility to do whatever you can do to help them get through whatever issue they're dealing with and make them better when they leave than when they came in. There's a requirement that an inmate leaves in as good a condition as he or she came in. I think that threshold is entirely too low. So the capacity to have programming space is really important. It's amazing to me how many folks don't understand the simple balancing of the checkbook, anger management, GEDs, social services, faith-based organizations that want to come in. It's unbelievable what happens when that occurs. Keeping in mind the recidivism rate in most counties is 70 to 76%. This is the book that folks sign when they first come in. This is moms and dads and kids and aunts and uncles and grandparents and friends. That is the mechanism. I looked at the book. I was a policeman for 28 years and I couldn't read very many of those names on there. So there's really not a true record of who's in your facility. It's very important that there's not just a signature, but we know a little bit about those folks before they come in, i.e. an inmate identifying people that will come in to visit, so the staff can understand who they are, where they're from, what the purpose of the visit is, and are they running a criminal empire or whatever it might be. Amazing how creative they are. The lobby of the current lobby of the facility, again, it's very small. It's not conducive to visitors. There's not a place for folks to really sit and wait, particularly if they're there to visit an inmate. We are required to give inmates at least 1 hour of recreation per day. This photograph is representative of the only recreational area that the jail facility currently has. It's outside on the south side of the building. There is no indoor rec. What's happening today in facilities, large and small, is that indoor rec is being constructed 14 to 16 feet above the floor. There's a louvered gate, and that louvered gate lifts up 3 to 4 feet, 6 to 7 feet wide, and that provides outside air to the indoor facility. It makes it an outdoor recreation area. So the cost of having to build two of those areas is no longer there. So there's a creative way to slice that piece of the pie. Again, the law library, just a closer view of what that is. New facility advantages of Hurry Spot. Technology drives so much of what we do, and in every aspect, no matter what we all have chosen to do with our lives. But the new facility advantages, I learned about these when we reconstructed, I guess, the 26-acre site that I was responsible for in Hamilton County. So I learned a lot about what is currently available today. Elevated control room is probably one of the most critical pieces of any new facility. And why? Staffing. The capital cost of a project similar to this one versus the long-term general fund expenditures are very different. Eventually that debt service is going to fall off, but that operational cost of those employees and all the associated costs with employees is going to be a permanent number that will stand the test of time. Elevated control room allows one individual to sit 12 to 14, maybe even 16 feet above the facility, above the pods, respective pods that generally are fashioned in a pie-type shape. And the windows in this pod, I'll show you a photograph of them in a minute, are cantilevered. So an individual can stand with his feet at the base of that glass, and the glass is cantilevered, and we can look straight down that wall. So there are no blind spots anywhere in the facility. Again, this is a huge staff benefit for you, huge staff benefit, because one person can oversee the entire facility. This is the inside of a steel cell, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a moment. The double envelope design is another new way of constructing these facilities. We don't have to build hardened facilities anymore with thick block walls and a lot of steel, because this exterior facade can be almost anything. It can be a pole building. It can almost be a residential type looking external facade, because inside there is a walkway that feeds the back of every one of these portable steel cells. The modular cells are cost effective from a construction standpoint, from a sustainability standpoint, and the continuous rear chase almost eliminates the need for a corrections officer or a maintenance person to actually physically go inside that cell. There's only two reasons that they have to go inside the cell. One is to change the light with LED technology that lasts a lot longer than they ever did before, and two is to unclog a toilet. But from the control room, you can control that water flow to that toilet. You can turn it on and turn it off. So fortunately, that the opportunity to clog those toilets with this type of technology is really becoming a thing of the past. But each cell has a shower. If you can control the inmate population and the movement of the population inside the cell, you become a much more efficient facility. And the coatings on the inside of these modular steel cells is a polyurea coating, similar to a rhino lining. And it's almost indestructible, even over time, and even in a shower. You saw the shower base when I talked about the handicapped one. Very problematic, high maintenance, but not the polyurea coatings. They really, really last. They still look, in the facility I was responsible for, they still look brand new. There's a view from the control room that I was talking about. You can see the visibility inside that room. These are two-man cells, so they're relatively small. There are some areas in there that you can't see, but the vast majority of it you can. With camera technology inside up in this area, you'll be able to see in this angle from the monitor inside that control room. The steel corrugated walkways, stairways, allow you to see through that stairway. That's something relatively new. At one point, there was a blind spot behind there, and you can only imagine what happened behind those stairways. You can see all day rooms, the indoor rec area, outdoor rec area. You can see the visitation area, at least control it. The booking and intake, all corridors, and no blind spots. A view from the elevated control room. Generally, they're dark like that. This glass is regular glass, just like you have in your homes. If it was lower than that, it would have to be a much different material than it is in an elevated spot. The solid walls on the first floor, the industrial or correctional windows are very expensive. So the least amount that you have to use, the better off you are from a capital project cost standpoint. So by not having to put those windows in the lower section, they can be solid block walls or concrete walls. This is an example of steel cells being loaded into the facility. We've done several projects around the state, in Michigan, Florida, Illinois, that we've used existing buildings, grocery stores, schools. This technology, these modular steel cells allow that because the external envelope of the building really doesn't matter. I talked briefly about the shower in every cell. I won't dwell upon that. All the furnishings are included. When these arrive on the construction site, they're completely ready with the exception of the hookup. So it's like a modular home, literally. You're literally rolling that in, hooking it up, and you're good to go and ready for business. All the things that it contains when it arrives. We talked about external light that these cell blocks and pods have to have. You'll see back on this one. And it's also amazing how people learn to communicate if they can see the outside and the outside can see them. And what they each look at, if you're with me. This type of construction doesn't allow any view to the outside with the exception of the external light. The light is able to come into this walkway, but there's windows in the backs of these modular steel cells, but they don't see, they're out. You can't see out, you can't see in, they're offset. So it provides enough light that comes into the cell, but there's no view to the outside world, with the exception of the sky. This is the booking area. It's a counter that I discussed. The correctional officer is sitting up on, generally an elevated area, sitting up here, and he's dealing with the inmates with a barrier, not face to face and within a matter of feet from each other. Okay. Facility staffing, almost done here, and then we'll move on. This slide is really important. One of the options that we looked at was adding on to your current facility to the south. And if we did that to meet the jail bed capacity that we currently need, we would have to add 8 new corrections officers. We could get really close to the necessary space for programming, your kitchen, your laundry, and all the necessary pieces and parts in every facility. But because of the layout of the existing facility and the add-on of the new facility, you'd have a very difficult time. Almost, it wouldn't be possible to safely staff that larger facility through current staffing model. So with the shift relief factor, we think that you'd have to add 8 people. Again, if the project moves forward, we'll certainly take a deep dive into your staffing models, not just what you should have today, but what you should have 20 or 25 years from now. I think that's certainly the responsible thing for us to do. If we staff a new facility, your new officers is 0. It's a really, really important slide. This, just for clarification, what does that mean? The housing control would be a person that sits in that elevated control area. The rover is going to be the person taking care of your general population that's currently in the facility and can support both the housing control and the inmate booking if there's a problem in the booking area. So 3 per shift is bare bones minimum. 3 per shift. There has to be a shift relief factor built in, vacation days, sick days, training days, etc. And that's how we came up with the 14 that you currently have today. So I applaud that number. Most facilities are not there. Generally, this number is not 0. Even, again, the numbers are relative, even in a small facility. Okay, we're going to do the site spike. Any questions on what I went through very quickly? Bring everybody up to speed. Okay.
As we talked briefly earlier, we looked at several sites. The approach we took to site was several. We got several recommendations. We talked to the commissioners and other people, and we looked at, I'm sure, at least 10. And some of these kind of bubbles at the top, they're kind of representative of the types of sites that you'd encounter. Obviously, the first site is to build onto the existing facility. There's the existing jail. There's the old sheriff's historic piece. When Doug talked about a cell pod, you can build that there, move the inmates into it, recreate all this space in here to do support. You know, the functions inside the jail kind of break down to sheriff's administration areas, jail support, intake and booking, which would happen there, and obviously inmate holding, and then you got these support functions, which is laundry and meals and those kind. Then you got the public that has to have the ability to come in and interact in a organized way. You want to keep people away from people that don't need to be together, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that's kind of the approach we take. At the existing site, we talked about the site limitations, parking is an issue, if you ever had to expand, that opportunity means you're going to buy property over here to make that happen. Obviously, you're going to need parking, and right now all you got is whatever's along this street right here. And that wouldn't change as your population went up either. So that was one site we looked at. I will say this about the construction. The phasing that has to go in to make that happen is challenging. There's a word for it. You're going to have to move people around. You're going to move people out. It's a lot of jockeying people around. Can it be done? Yes, it can. The more challenging that is, the more it costs to get it developed. But the other site we looked at was here's the courthouse, and it's this big parking lot over here. Three things about that is you lose a very significant piece of downtown parking, and you've got a library over here that shares that space with you now. The question came up after the meeting last night, well, why couldn't you just put that over there? Well, you can, and but all the same problems exist with that one. So, I mean, those are interchangeable. The other thing that I failed to bring up last night is when you begin to think about something like this, that's trying to interact with your courthouse square, the cost of your building exteriors. I heard Doug talking about putting a jail inside a pre-engineered building. That can be done. Back away from areas like that. They don't have to be anything fancy. But when you start putting something in the downtown area that has to interact architecturally with the courthouse and your library and some other significant pieces of this town, then you don't want to put a bowl building up there. So the cost of those development costs for that go up. We also talked last night briefly about the opportunity for city and county to cohabitate for law enforcement. That can happen on any one of these sites. There's a whole lot of advantages for that. They would share the same security system. They technology for computers and communication systems, and they can share the same public lobby, the same a lot of the same conference space, training space, a whole lot of stuff that can be shared would cut the cost of duplicating down on the city side, and the city is out of space. And if they got a situation, if they get another employee, then they don't have the space to meet their codes. So anyway, so there's that scenario. This site was out by the fairground. The fairground is over here by John, and there's some residentials here, and then there's a little bit of business out here. The thing we like about this is it's a clear palette. You got all the opportunity to do all kinds of things. Get your expansion done, plenty of parking, your layout all done in a very efficient way. The problem, the access to utilities is good. We've got a big drainage ditch over here that we tapped in for storm. We could actually build a berm around this to shelter that somewhat, but so from a standpoint of easy to develop and probably low cost development, probably the lowest cost development we've got of any of these options. You got to decide, where you want your jail. There's two big questions that happens in any community is how much is it going to cost and where are you going to put it? Well, you're going to put it somewhere, but you're not going to put it in my backyard, and you're not going to put it where my kids are interacting with it, and those kinds of things. It has happened, but those are always the two big the struggles that every community goes through. So even though good site, the environment around it might be a little problematic. Also coming in on Jefferson Street, west of town, there's a big drainage ditch I'm sure you're all aware of. I believe this property is owned or was owned by Pioneer, I think. Kind of staying with the same layout, get some more parking. There's some opportunity to do that. You're right up against the ability to do any kind of expansion. That would have to happen back here somewhere. If that time ever comes, and I will tell you, one of the biggest mistakes that you can make is plan something and not plan on ever having to expand it. Will you have to? Someday, maybe. But 92 counties in the state of Indiana redid jails at some point in time, and very few have thought of expandability. Very few. And mistakes learned and lessons learned. So mistakes made, lessons learned. So anyway, there's that site. And then the other one that we kind of uncovered was this FMC site up on Dearborn Avenue. Excuse me, I've been fighting cold all week. There's a lot of good opportunity here. Good drainage, good access to city utilities, a lot of space, a lot of expandability. You'd be able to possibly do a work release there at some point in time. But the thing that there's a couple things we like about this beyond that, above the others, is you've got some residential over in here, but this is mostly commercial, industrial type environment. It's still very close to the courthouse. If the city would decide to cohabitate, you're still not very far away from the city operations. The philosophy between transporting inmates, if you got to put them in a car, whether they go 1 block or 5 blocks, it really doesn't. You got to put them in a car, and you got to handle them. So good proximity. Most of these sites all have, as a matter of fact, all these sites have good proximity. We did look at several that were out and away, and they didn't make the final cut for numerous reasons. But anyway, the thing we liked about this the most is when Doug talks about putting in low-cost envelopes, here's your opportunity to do that. And Also, the fact you've got a building there that's half torn down and needs to be all torn down, and the site needs to be cleaned up. And so this gives you an opportunity to kind of clean that corner of town up and put it back in something that's much more useful and better reuse than what it is now, and much more attractive. So there's the sites. Now, that's kind of what we covered last night as far as jails are concerned. We can catch any questions. I'd like, if you guys don't mind, I'd like Mike to back up and do a very similar, really quick pass on what we looked at the courthouse. But we'll take your questions on the jail if you guys got it. Not headway. Okay. I like it. I'll back up. Mike, if you want to step up here and do a brief overview of the courthouse issues. I'll tell you, I'll jump on that one. Oh, that one's down. Got that advances.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. I won't take a long time on the courthouse. The courthouse is a jewel. It's been a jewel for many, many, many years. And you've done a lot of things to take care of the courthouse. And it's on the National Register of Historic Places. There's some elegant things that have been said about the courthouse in the Indiana Courthouse Preservation Advisory Commission. This is a commission that the General Assembly and the Governor dedicated to studying and enhancing the preservation of historic courthouses, of which Tipton is. We can go back and focus on some of these items. I think some of them are in the handout. It's important the commission reminded us that it's important to preserve the historic courthouse as an identifier of your county. Courthouses were first built over 100 years ago. Many of them look like they took the entire county budget to build the courthouse, and they were done so to attract business, to attract people to move to counties in Indiana. They have a very important symbolic presence in the community. They represent the community. They're a metaphor for the progress of the community, and they're a continual symbol for county government, but also many social activities like the fairs and the pork festival that you have, and other activities. I touched a little bit on some of the things that challenges in the courthouse. Some of the handicapped ADA issues need to be studied. The ramp is okay, but the driveway is even worse. By the time a wheelchair gets all the way up the driveway to the ramp, it's pretty well over. The south entrance to the courthouse really, really needs improvement from an appearance standpoint and from a functional standpoint, from accessibility, security, and the appearance of the south entrance with dumpsters and trash all over the place. It's just not really acceptable considering the quality and the work that's done in the courthouse. This was just a slide to indicate the importance of having security for the courthouse, not only at the entrance doors, but at the entrance to the courtroom itself. The south entrance lobby should be a showcase area where people come into the lobby of the courthouse. This is what we see is mowers and yard equipment and things like that, and inadequate space. We have some leaking issues in the side walls of the courthouse. Has been going on a long time. Someone last night mentioned leaking actually coming up through the floor that needs to be addressed. Here's leaking through the walls that has been happening for years. The elevator that you do have is not handicapped accessible. It at one time served the needs to move people up and down. One of the important things you have is to put an elevator in that's sufficient to carry county records to a place that's easily accessible for everyone. County records and record storage is an incredibly important goal to achieve. This room is up on the third floor, I believe. It's the old law library. It's so packed with records you can barely get through the aisles of this room. I don't know how anybody can find anything. The floor load I calculated is over 250 pounds per square foot. The floor structure is just barely designed to hold that. And You have more records than many other offices that really need to be kept. You can't throw them away, I understand that. We need to design a new place for record storage in the building. We also need to take care of a historic element that's a beautiful painting on the ceiling of the circuit courtroom. This is now covered with a suspended ceiling. The suspended ceiling should be removed. The painting should be restored to restore the grandeur of this courtroom. The ductwork can be easily moved to the side wall locations and other locations to cool the room. There's some other ductwork and pipes that have been put in the building that really help heat and cool the building, but in some cases weren't put in very carefully, and so they kind of become an eyesore. This is in an office down on the first floor, and this can easily be blended into the architecture of the building with building bulkheads and enclosures and still keeping the same piping to make it fit into the character of the building. Some of the office spaces are just cluttered and just need some help with furnishings. They're appropriate for the office use. Yes?
No.
I thought someone had a question back there. Okay. This is a public gathering room on the first floor that's in need of improvements, moving the column over and improving the light, improving the painting and the condition of the room. The north entrance of the building is okay. It had one historic doors on it one time. It should be replaced. Here's where the doors are on the attic of the building on the 5th floor. They can easily be put back in place to restore that part of the beauty of the building. Here's where we are in the John Tipton room. You've done a lot of improvements in this room. We were just talking about some wire management and some other things that can help. In the public lobby areas, just improvements with the ceiling and some of the wall surfaces could greatly help these areas. And then throughout the building, you've been gradually improving a lot of the woodwork, but relocating some of the electrical, taking all the cardboard panels out of the walls and so forth would improve these areas. Here's a floor plan of the building to show what some of our recommended findings after we interviewed all of the staff through the building and took a good look at the structure of the building, realized that there's a need for added space in a number of different areas. In the men's with women's restroom, when the building was first built, more men worked in the building than women. Today, more women work in the building than men. These two rooms should be switched. On the first floor, the health department is very crowded, needs to be expanded. The meeting room I talked about needs to be improved and making it welcome to people coming into the courthouse. The VA department should be moved to the first floor where it's easily accessible. The old elevator doesn't meet code. We should put a new elevator in that connects all the floors of the building and opens the lobby up so that it can be improved and be a welcoming entrance. On the second floor, again, the new elevator that extends up through should be there. We should add a second fire stair through the building. The stair only has a second way out of the building on 2 levels, and all the upper levels are fire traps. You don't have any sprinklers in the building, and the fire stair should be extended up through the building. Other departments need to be cleaned up, expanded. Some of the areas that were here, I think, like the VA and IT, we can look for another place for them so that the auditor and treasurer's areas can be expanded. On the courtroom floor, in addition to the courtroom ceiling improvements, we suggest adding public restrooms to that floor because it makes it more publicly accessible, adding a new elevator, adding the second stairway, and then taking the law library that was there out and building a new slab above this room so we can then move the storage to the 5th floor, which is the attic, and expand offices into these areas. We're actually being able to take your structure of a building as it is, add square footage to it inside the building, add accessibility, and add beauty all at the same time. Here's the second stair going on up through the 4th floor. Here's that added slab above the law library, and here's the expanded prosecutor's office. On the 5th floor, which is an attic, it was designed for another floor. We're recommending this be a central storage archive where all your record storage can be placed. The fire stair here extends up to this floor. The new elevator extends to this floor. The existing stairway extends to this floor. And all the mechanical systems that serve spaces below and this floor are placed around this area. It's a very workable plan. Somebody planned this building very well. Much of the structure here is well designed. We will have to add some to the structure to carry the load of all of the records, but that will open up the floors below. This was just a summary of some of those same needs, and we went back to the jail. Mike, I'll turn it over to you because I know that you're eager to move on to cost evaluations and budgets.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions, comments? Gee, we put a lot of work in this. I don't have any questions on it. Okay, so if we're down to that, then let's get down here to talk about dollars and cents. This is why we brought Gary here. On cost of the things we're going to go over here is, first of all, we're going to look at courthouse probable costs, jail probable costs, and then Gary's going to talk about funding options and those kinds of things. So with that, preliminary project cost for the courthouse includes construction, furniture, furnishings, equipment, and professional fees is in the neighborhood of $3 million to $3.5 million. Most of that money is wrapped up in the 5th floor, getting the new stairway through the building, getting the ADA put together, and a new floor, which opens up all that space, and the actual renovations are those kinds of things that we really do are really not the huge part of that number. And on the jail and sheriff's administration, same thing. Now I'll say that these costs do not include any property acquisition, site clearing, environmental remediation, or financing costs, which Gary will cover, the financing costs. And develop that existing site. We're looking at a minimum of $6.5 to $7 million on the existing site. And then on a new site would be $10 to $11 million. And we talked about last night about about the cost of keeping here in this facility and moving people off and the overload, and the cost of moving inmates to other facilities is, it could be as much as $400,000 a year just to do that kind of thing. So that's kind of where we're at, and those numbers, by the time Gary gets done, we think these are all pretty inclusive. They are preliminary. These numbers get better as you go along. The more investigation you do, the more design happens. We're able to fine tune these a little bit. That's where our projections are at this point. With that, any questions?
Yeah, Mike, on the courthouse, initially there was some discussion about security issues, and I know on the drawings, was there any thought about, are we going to do one entrance, are we going to have a metal detector, are we going to do some things like that that other courthouses do, or is that another phase?
Actually,
Now let me talk about that spike briefly. We did consider that you would have a south entrance. So one of the reasons we kind of approved the south entrance is to make that the primary entrance, because that's where all the cars are. Make that the primary entrance. The other entrances are locked, and the access to the courtroom would also have a metal detector at that location. We also recommend camera security be added. Camera security is not as expensive as it used to be, and can be added within reason at the entrances around the perimeter of the courthouse and in critical areas. So we did take that into consideration.
And is that in some of
that's in the numbers. That's in the numbers. The other thing we looked at was an expansion to existing duress notifications that some of the offices have. It's there, it works fine. It's the kind of, if I was out buying those kinds of systems, that's the kind of system I'd buy. But you need more of it. So it's just
Like, I'd like to add to that too. All those cameras, Brad, would be fed to that elevated control room in the jail. that's staffed 24/7. So they can be motion cameras, they can be tilt-pan zoom cameras, so that control officer would have access to this building, externally and internally, every single day of the year.
Also, as part of the judge's chambers area near the main courtroom, we would plan to put some holding rooms so that prisoners brought over to stand trial would be in a secure area. That we didn't show that in detail at this point, but there's enough room there to accomplish that.
What kind of grant money is available for these projects?
You laughed, I didn't have to.
I thought that was part of your job.
Actually, there is a little bit there. There is minor money available from a planning standpoint through historic landmarks. But the grant for the courthouse, for the jail, doesn't exist. Before the courthouse, the Department of Natural Resources offers a matching grant, 50-50. They'll give $50,000 if you put up $50,000. And what they like to look at certain features of the courthouse and say, they just don't want to put money into moving lights around, those kinds of things. But what they do like is they like to pick at certain features. Restoration of the courthouse ceiling is a beautiful. The front doors, the enhancement of the rear entrance. Those are kind of things that they look at and they say, these things are historically significant and we want to participate in preserving those. You get to 100,000 of those and they'll add in up to 50% of that.
In other words, we're saying they're all 50-50, but not on the entire package that we're talking about, just certain things.
Since 9/11, federal funding has really changed for bricks and mortar. I suspect there will be some funding available for some of the infrastructure improvements, and it's a good question. Some of the things such as the security cameras, the security vestibules, those kinds of things, but for bricks and mortar for outside walls, it just simply isn't out there anymore. It's just not. It used to be, but it's not anymore.
And we talked last night about the advisory committees saying to the General Assembly, you know, we understand the challenge of the counties. Guys, you know, you ought to think about bucking up and helping out a little bit. Tell us about all these things we got to do. We call them unfunded mandates, but all these things we got to do, you never offer any money. However, there is none of that available yet, and not in the foreseeable future, but at least the General Assembly has heard it and listened to it. What they do with it, Gary knows that better than I do.
There you go, Gary. That was in your court now.
I think a lot of the rhetoric, if you listen to what's going on in Washington, everyone's more concerned about the deficit and all the spending, which doesn't really translate to more grants.
Yeah.
That would be my guess, but I
In
just
other words,
imagine
you're saying there's not the grants that were out there before, and so obviously there's not, there can't be as big a staff as there used to be. I remember there was probably 24, 25 groups just a few years back that were trying to give money away in grants. That only appeared before then.
You know, those groups have become very focused in their drive. And if you was putting together something that was a community service type thing, and I'm talking like healthcare, mental health, family services, things like that, there's grants for that stuff.
Yeah,
but when you get around to this kind of thing, it just drifts away from their focus, and very, very hard to find anything at all. And sometimes when you get a grant, it almost wasn't worth it.
it almost isn't worth it.
Yeah.
All you
What you go through to get it, and the federal requirements, and the restrictions that can put on you.
Yeah, right.
Those kinds of things. So, good question though. Glad that came up.
But having said that, it's something you should keep your eyes open because, for example, with the stimulus programs that came out a few years ago, the federal government did have certain programs not for these types of projects, for other infrastructure projects, and they're looking for shovel-ready projects. So as you move closer to construction, it does make sense to kind of keep your eye on programs that might focus.
And we all do that. We all work in that circle all the time and interact with one another and say, hey, did you know? And ready to move on? Okay, I'm going to give this to you. You know your stuff better than me. Down arrow does everything, and there's a pointer on here somewhere. That's down, yep.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. name's Gary Malone. I'm a CPA and a partner at Humble and Associates, our firm. Many of you may already know us. Our firm does a lot of financial consulting for local governments throughout Indiana. So our clients consist of cities, towns, counties, schools, libraries, and a large amount of that work has to do with funding public programs and helping with bond issues. We assist communities for somewhere between 100 and 150 bonds each and every year. So we have a lot of experience in this area. Some of the comments I'm going to make are really more illustrated in nature. You know, what other counties that are faced with these same types of issues, what do they do? And try to take some information and give you some rough ballpark ideas on how those might be funded. If you choose to move forward, I can tell you there are 1,000 variations of what I want to talk about. And so before the final financial plan is developed, you'd want to explore those options very, very carefully, and so you can make the financing as efficient as possible. The other comment is that I've tried to be very conservative. And so the numbers that we're using here, and I'll kind of talk about that as we go through, are much higher than what you could achieve today. What's going to happen in 5 years from now, I have no idea. So I wanted to be conservative to kind of give you kind of a worst case scenario, but the sooner that you move forward, the more likely those costs are going to be less. The longer things are delayed, those decisions are delayed, the more likely those costs are going to increase. In Indiana, we fund public projects through the issuance of bonds. And bonds is simply a type of loan. So you can kind of think of it as a loan that has a lot of strings attached. So the General Assembly, our state, provides a process that we have to go through to borrow money, but we call those bonds. And you're going to find that there are two basic kinds of bonds. One is called the general obligation bond, and that's a bond that is more of a direct loan. It's a bond typically paid from property taxes, can also be paid from income taxes, but it's a loan directly from the county, directly to the county from a particular lender. The second type of loan, referred to as a lease rental financing, and that all goes back to the 1800s when we decided to build canals in Indiana, and the state got into financial difficulties, and so now we have a constitutional amendment that limits the amount of general obligation borrowing that we have. So for larger types of projects, we use a lease. Leases are very common in Indiana. I would suggest that there would be no school in Indiana being built today if it wasn't for the use of leases. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But those are the two basic types of borrowing we see. How we repay that borrowing depends upon the revenues that we have available. The most common way that we repay borrowing is through the use of property taxes. And over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a large push by the state to encourage local governments to use other forms of revenue to borrow against instead of property taxes. We now have property tax caps. We have all kinds of new processes to go through to use property taxes to pay bonds. So the push of the state level is to try to encourage folks to use other forms of other revenues to pay for bonds. That's not to say that you can't use property taxes, because we still use property taxes every day to repay bonds. The other forms of revenues that we use to pay bonds in situations like this would be income taxes. And in Indiana, I think we have like 8 to 10 different forms of income taxes now. The ones that are more common would be the county option income tax, or the CAGIT. Here in Tipton County, we have a CAGIT tax in place at a rate of 1%. We generally don't use CAGIT to fund projects such as this, because CAGIT is really more of a property tax replacement tax. So most of the dollars you collect in CAGIT actually go to property tax relief. So we don't use that very often. The next form of tax is the County Economic Development Income Tax. We use an acronym of CEDIT, but it's or EDIT, but it's the Economic Development Income Tax. The rate here is at 0.25% or 0.5%. And an EDIT tax is a tax that is often used to fund projects such as this. What we have seen in many counties, and I know folks, how many folks are on the council here? Brad? The folks that are on the council, this is budget season. I don't know if budget season ever has a start and finish anymore, but this is kind of budget season, and a lot of folks really struggle how to make ends meet. So many of the EDIT dollars that in the past have been available to pay for public projects, capital projects, oftentimes we see county councils having to utilize those dollars just to pay for operations. But as you move forward, that's something you want to look at very carefully. What is the county's budget? What edit dollars are available, and could any of those edit dollars be earmarked to pay for a project such as this? The other form is called a supplemental. Let me back up. You also have what's called a local option income tax, and the tax that you have here is what's called a levy growth replacement tax, and it's purely for property tax relief. But because you've adopted that tax, there's also the opportunity to adopt what's called a public safety tax. And a public safety tax, you can adopt that in the same rate equal to your local tax, which is about 0.17, but those dollars can only be used for operations. Did not use those for capital expenditures, but we do have some counties kind of switching dollars back and forth. So sometimes we'll have a county that will adopt the public safety tax, use those dollars to help the general fund, and then take the edit dollars that were used in the general fund and move those over to help pay for the project. So it can be kind of complicated, kind of messy to work through, but that can be a solution as well. The other solution that we're beginning to see more counties do, and I think there's probably about 8 counties in Indiana that do this, is through what's called, well, I've kind of called a supplemental income tax because I don't know what else to call it. But the process is that counties, through their local state representatives, go to the General Assembly and ask for permission to adopt a new income tax that is used specifically for projects such as this. It's different than the other income taxes because it's not distributed to any other taxing unit. Every dollar that's collected goes directly into this project to pay for this project. Once the project's paid for, the tax goes away. So it's a different type of tax. We've got working on a project in Perry County right now. They have I've adopted a 0.5% income tax to pay for it. It'll be a 20-year financing, but because the interest rates are so low, it'll probably be paid off within about a 15-year period. Brad?
Is there much, caution with that because of the fluctuation of incomes?
Yeah, that is correct.
So you have to be a little conservative on.
That is correct. And I've got a slide in here that helps demonstrate that, but that's a very good observation. The property taxes typically are more stable, although they've been less stable in recent years than they have been historically. But property tax revenues typically are more stable revenue source. Income taxes tend to be more volatile. So when we adopt an income tax, we have to adopt a tax at a rate higher that will produce more revenue than we think we need just to provide that cushion. We call that coverage.
Talking about that one, 0.5% or so tax, and you went through somebody to get that permission, and a 20-year period. If you're thinking to pay off a note this big, 10 million, would you figure?
I've got some slides. I got some slides.
Oh, you got some.
I got some slides to kind of show you how that works. But
sorry, I didn't mean to get ahead of you.
No, those are good questions. I got some slides to address that. So I'll go through each of those funding options here in a minute, just to kind of give you an idea of how they typically work. But don't wait for me to get finished to ask questions. If anybody has questions, we're going to start as we go. I want to talk for just a moment about the general obligation debt limit. In Indiana, the limit is 2% of your net assessed value, and so that's roughly equal to about $4.3 million. So any borrowing of under $4.3 million, we could use a general obligation bond to fund. Anything over and above that, it would need to be a lease rental bond. With a project anywhere close to this, we would always suggest a lease rental bond just to preserve your borrowing capacity. Because there are some things that you really can't use a lease bond for, so having some of the general obligation borrowing capacity available always makes a lot of good sense. The other thing to think about is the referendum, and that has to do with a property tax supported bond issue. This has been changing over the last few years, but today the process that the county would go through to borrow money with the intent to repay that with property tax, we would need to look at the size of the project, not the bond issue, but the project. So we look at all the project costs. If the project costs are greater than $12 million, then the county would be required to go through a referendum process. That means that question would have to be posed to the voters as should we raise property taxes to fund the jail. And it's a very long, drawn-out, divisive
I
process.
mean, you
to
could
go
do it
through.
without raising the property taxes, it's called mill under.
You could still raise property taxes, but it would be a different process.
Okay.
So you
You
could
may
do it.
have to still raise property taxes at a 12, not 12, 20, right?
If you wanted to use property taxes to pay for it,
Yeah.
if the project was greater than $12 million, we would have to go through a public
I
referendum.
understand.
If it's less than 12 million, it goes to what's called a petition and remonstrance process.
Oh, okay.
So it is a different process, it's a little more streamlined and a little quicker to pass
Got it.
through. But it still requires public input. There's a process where property taxpayers and voters can object to the process and stop the process with a petition and remonstrance process. So it's not a green light to just move forward. There is a legal process that the county would
The
go
big
through.
question that I really had is if it's 12 or under, you wouldn't have to raise property taxes, you would say yes, you would.
If you want to use, if you use income taxes, the answer is no. But if you use property taxes, these are the things to think about.
Property taxes, you have to.
Correct.
Okay.
Do you have questions?
Yes, you said that on the second point of the referendum threshold, lesser of 1% of assessed value, that in Tipton County would be around $8 million, approximately. So-
Well, it would be the lesser of those two numbers. And it's not the net assessed value, it's the gross assessed value before any deductions. Do you recall what the gross assessed value was? I knew it before I left the office, but I left that stack of papers on my desk. But that's something we want to look at very carefully to judge what that might be. So those are the things to think about as far as the process, whether it's a general obligation bond or a lease bond. The next is to get an idea about how much money needs to be borrowed. And we just picked some numbers that were within the ranges that Spike had mentioned. If you decide to move forward, there's tons of things that have to be done. There's a very long process to develop plans and specifications. There's a process that the architects and the engineers go through. They'll eventually get to the point where they'll take construction bids. And once they receive construction bids, it's only at that point that you really know what the cost of the project is going to be. So these are very, very rough numbers just to illustrate concepts. Recognize there's a whole long process that you would go through to determine what that construction cost would be. We'd have to account for land acquisition, and if there's any land to be acquired, we have a placeholder for that. That would need to be determined. That's a number we'd have to think about. We have a number called capitalized interest. Now, if we use a lease financing, the way that works is the county would create a nonprofit building corporation or a building authority. That nonprofit would issue the bonds on the county's behalf. They would build the improvements. Once the improvements are built, they would then lease those back to the county. And that's the way schools are built. That process is used every day. But what we have to think about is we're going to use those lease rental payments. So once the facility's done, that building corporation will lease that building back to the county until the bonds are all paid off. Once the bond's paid off, then the building corporation goes away. But in the meantime, we're going to use those lease payments to make the bond payments. But the lease payments can't begin until construction is complete. When we borrow money, we have interest on those bonds from day one. So what we have to do is we've got to borrow enough money to pay the interest during that construction period. And we call that capitalized interest. So that's a number we got to have a placeholder for, so we know we got to pay for construction, any land. We also have to pay for that interest during that construction period. And then there's a variety of issuance costs to pay underwriters, attorneys, accountants, and all the other processes that you go through. And we need to add all those up. So if we have a $3.5 million courthouse improvement, we're probably looking at a bond issue roughly in the $4 million range. If we have $11 million for a jail renovation or improvements or a new jail, that probably is going to translate to about $13.5 million when we account for those other costs. If we add them all together and do it all at one time, then we're going to be in that $17 million range at that point. Just to kind of give you an idea on size of magnitude. We then, that becomes the amount of the bond or the amount of the loan. And there's a variety of ways that bonds are placed and marketed. Banks buy bonds, mutual funds buy bonds. We typically use an underwriter or a placement agent to find those buyers and find the best home for those bonds where you can achieve the lowest interest rate. And so that becomes a loan, and that loan's going to be paid back over a number of years. For projects such as this, we typically think in terms of 20 years. There's nothing magic about 20 years. It can be 18 years, it can be 22 years, and it depends on the circumstances. But for planning purposes, we think in terms of about 20 years. And that's going to bear interest at a tax-free rate. If you think about tax-free rates over the course of time, we typically think of those in between 5–5.5%. And over the course of time, so I'm using 6% as an illustration because if it takes a few years to kind of get through this process, who knows what the rates are going to be. If the bonds were sold today, that rate would be somewhere between 3.5% and 4%. Never thought I'd ever say that, but that's amazing.
Does the percent change periodically, or does it stay?
They change every day.
Okay.
Interest rates are driven by the market, and they change all the time. Right now, the Federal Reserve System has a lot of controls over the interest rates. The discount rate for the banks is very low. There's all kinds of stuff going on. Once all that stuff goes away, and eventually it will go away, rates will kind of find its place at a market rate. And the likelihood is, I'm going to guess the rates are going to go higher before they go lower. I've said that before, but been wrong, by the way. But I think over the course of time, it's very likely that rates will go back up, and they'll typically be in that 5% range. So just for illustration purposes, I'm going to use 6. I recognize that it could be quite a bit lower than that if rates stay at these historic low levels.
See, what amount of money would we have to have going to bond issue, to get started before the construction starts? In other words, we got to pay, what kind of money would we be talking?
$300,000 to $500,000.
How much?
$300,000 to $500,000. Which? By the way,
300, 500,000?
300 to 500.
Oh, 300 to 500,000.
Which what you would want to do is,
That would get us started, and then as soon as we break ground, we go into the bond issue.
as soon as you sell bonds, then what you can do, but I won't jump on you. What you can do is you can pass a resolution at the beginning of the project that once the bonds are sold, you can reimburse yourself for that money.
Yeah, okay.
If there's county funds available, it can be a reimbursement resolution to do that. If there's not monies available, this bond can be sold. We use it as a bond anticipation note. And that's also means a short-term loan. So sometimes you have a short-term loan and then repay that with long-term loan. So that's how we do that.
So that's not a big deal.
Not a big deal. It's
Got it.
so the payment on a $4 million bond issue is about $400,000. If we were to do that today, if we could have a rate of 4%, that payment's closer to $300,000. Significant reduction. For a jail, the $1.2 million payment, if that was done today, they would be just under $1 million. And for the combined project, instead of $1.6 million, it would be closer to $1.3 million. So I've got some cushion in these numbers, just because we're kind of talking. So if we use property taxes to make the payment, what we do is convert that to a tax rate. And so we've simply looked at the net assessed value, we've taken the payment, divided that by the net assessed value, and calculated a tax rate. So if we had a bond issue that sold at 6%, we'd have about a little over between a 4 and 5 cent tax rate for the courthouse, about a 15-cent tax rate for the jail, and about a 19-cent overall. If it was done today, it would be closer to 4 cents, 13 cents, and 17 cents if it was done with the lower interest rates. And we've got an illustration about how much that might affect property taxes. Now this is an important point. If you were to go through a referendum and the levy was approved by referendum, then that additional tax rate is not part of those property tax caps. So a taxpayer would pay that additional rate over by the tax cap. If it's not done through a referendum, so if these amounts were lower, then that would be subject to those tax caps, and so there would be a limit in to what a given taxpayer would have to pay. But here we're assuming that, just so we understand how that works. But that kind of gives you an idea about how much more per year that tax rate would mean to typical taxpayers without consideration of the tax caps. So if you had a $150,000 home, that increase in the tax bill could be anywhere from $30 to $126 per year. At today's interest rates, it's closer to $26 to just over $100. Just kind of give you a rough idea about what that would mean in terms of property taxes.
And then again, after the project be paid off, that would.
It goes away.
Goes away.
It goes away. Now, the other way that we would do this could be through the use of an income tax. And an income tax, and Brad kind of pointed this out earlier, income taxes are more volatile. So when we calculate a tax rate, we have to calculate a tax rate that is going to be higher than what we think we really need.
Right.
I call that Murphy's Law, because I'm Irish.
Yeah.
That is, if anything can go wrong, it probably will.
Yeah.
And so we always build in that cushion. And for a project like this, we would want to think in terms of 125% coverage, which means that we would have enough tax money to pay the bonds 1.5 times, 1.25 times. So that gives you about a 25% cushion.
Yeah.
So if we pay the bond off over 20 years and we have a 25% cushion and things go as planned, we can pay that bond off early. So instead of 20 years, it can maybe pay it off over 16 or 17. Does that make sense?
If this rate was imposed and we had the 0.8, are every one of those dollars obligated to go to pay the bond?
Correct.
So you don't have the ability to just pay what the bond was supposed to be and then keep the excess?
That's correct.
So
Every dollar that's authorized goes to pay the bond.
And if
Now,
it's
there's-
more than the payment's supposed to be because you allowed for it, you still add that to your.
Right.
So in other words, you automatically can, you could be paying it down. Because if, you know, everybody, housing projects like a grove, I mean, people got bigger houses, whatever, your program would be paid off 10 years, or 15 years, or 12 years, because you have to put it all toward the note. You can't take any excess that year and use it for anything else, like he's asking.
Yes. Now, the caveat is this: it's depending upon how that legislation is written.
Oh, okay.
Most of the, and so that's a key point, but most of the legislation is written, so the dollars generated, all of them have to go to pay the capital
Right on.
cost of the project. I can think of one or two counties
That didn't do
that asked the General Assembly to provide enough extra money to pay for the cost to operate the jail in addition to that.
Oh,
But but most counties have not done that. So, but that's a local decision
yeah.
in how that is structured, and it also depends upon your state representative. Someone will have to carry that through the General Assembly,
Right.
and it'll be up to the General Assembly to provide the county with that authority.
Gotcha.
So that's not a slam dunk. I mean, it does require that the General Assembly approve that, but it has been done in a number of other counties. So, and again, these are a little bit higher as well. I kind of recalculated that if we had a 4% interest rate, it'd probably be about a 0.7% instead of 8%. So there's some cushion. If you move forward, you want to take a really close look at that. Also, if you had other edit revenues available, you could reduce this even further if you wanted to pledge other county funds to pay for it.
You could add edit funds into paying it too?
You could, right.
That's kind of an easy.
We were in Perry County, for example, the jail actually happened to be in the tax increment area, and so we've got some of the TIF revenue going to pay the jail too.
So you never have to worry about, population dropping in that, because you dig in the edit funds to pay it if you didn't have enough.
Well, typically, that's why that 25% cushion is
Yeah.
there. So once it's designed, you could reasonably expect that the edit that the money from this new tax will pay off the bonds because of that cushion.
Yeah, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
And when a bond is issued, it'll have a feature in there that allows it to be prepaid at a given point in time. So that's usually about 8 to 10 years out, but then you can start using that accumulated money to start prepaying the bond. Okay? And this gives you a rough idea of what that might mean to typical taxpayers at various levels of taxable income. I've got a little footnote on here that says assumes a property tax backup. What I have found, we found to be very, very helpful, is to use an edit tax we used to be able to buy bond insurance. I don't know if you've ever heard anything about bond insurance, but there were some companies that provided bond insurance, and it raised the credit rating of the bond, reduced the interest rates, and makes things a lot more efficient. Well, those are pretty much gone at this point in time. So what we have found, if we use a property tax as a backup, this is designed so there was never an expectation to ever use the property tax. But by doing that, we can eliminate the amount of reserves, we can keep the amount of coverage to a minimum, and it actually reduces the interest rate. So it's like creating your own insurance policy, basically, is what it is. But that's a local policy decision, and that's something to think through as we move forward. Some folks don't want to do that, others are comfortable doing that. That's just a local decision, but it's a way to make the financing more efficient and reduce the cost to taxpayers.
Right. It's a great program.
So with that, I think that ends the slide. But I'm happy to answer any other questions if that's all I have.
Flip us the light on, do it. Watch your eye. There you go.
If you made the jail big enough that potentially pay for itself, if you house inmates from out of county?
Yeah, we'll talk, once we go ahead, I'll fill in if I need to.
That's a great question. We talked last night about having a crystal ball, I wish we did. We don't know what the Department of Corrections is going to do with the future DOC housing models. Again, driven by the large part of the state legislature. There's been discussion over the course of the last 2 years at least about sending funds back to local communities to you guys pay for. But we thought that was going to gain some momentum last year. The long session, the budget session this year, I anticipate that being a really hot topic. If that happens, that means the DOC will no longer house felony inmates, post-adjudicated, and they'll be ordered back to the county jail where they were convicted. If that happens, we're going to see jail populations skyrocket, and that trend line that we talked about earlier is going to be a much steeper line in the future if that happens. The answer to the simple answer to your question is yes, it can generate revenue. If you house DOC inmates under the current model, and if you do it to generate a significant amount of revenue, I would caution you to think that you're going to be able to cover your debt service by revenue generated from the facility. I think that the very practical approach to that is to say whatever revenue is generated from that facility, we can apply towards the operation of the facility. That would be your general fund. So there is a true savings there for every dollar you appropriate. But to go into this thinking that there's a possibility of paying it down through that revenue is probably not accurate. Don't know what will happen if the DOC does send those felons back to the local communities. Most facilities, we talked again about this last night, contiguous to Tipton County, are full. I know Hamilton County is full, Tipton County is full, or Howard County is full, Tipton County is full, Clinton, Wabash, Madison, the whole area, they're just simply full. So I don't know what will happen if the DOC will compensate for those felons or not, and so at what rate. I hope that answers. That's great.
Since we're in August right now and we are getting ready to do budgets, if through 2012, if the decision was made, we're going to do all these courthouse renovations, we're going to build a new jail at X amount of dollars, and the decision was to go forward, what kind of timeline would you project, I mean, with the financing and the construction, and when's it over?
Gary, do you have a handle on the legislation part of that? I've got a handle on the rest of it.
On the legislative part of it, if you choose to go down that path, you want to be ready to go by November, because you'd have to, because that starts the legislative process, and that process is kind of unpredictable. But if it were approved by the end of the session, then typically you'd have some flexibility. Then we come back to the council. So if the General Assembly approved it, they'd be done. This is a short session, so this gets done in April or March, April, something like that. So you would know. If it didn't pass, then you have to wait a year. But if it passes, then it would come back to the council, and then the council would have to take action to actually enact the tax. The General Assembly simply gives you the authority to do it. It's the council's responsibility to enact the tax. And then in Perry County, that became effective 1st of October. And the state certified revenues beginning in January the following year. So you'd actually have revenues that year from January is when and that's kind of on that's the fastest track you could be on. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, there's all kinds of work. So the financing piece of it can be done simultaneous with the drawings and the architectural and engineering parts of it, and hopefully they would all come together at about the same point in time.
So there's some information that the legislature's going to want to know about what you're going to do, and they're going to want some better information than what we can do preliminarily. So there's going to be an expense of getting to that point. That will be a huge expense, but it will be a little closer analysis, a better judgment of what we're dealing with. So that would happen in this period, the same period of time that we're talking between now and December. Sooner the better, because once it goes there and they say that's the number you're looking for, and they say, okay, we'll stamp it, it's got to work. Because there ain't no pool to go back to, just good old plain Southern Indiana English. So you got that stuff that's going to happen during that same period of time. Once you get to the point where we're saying, okay, we're going to do this, and we're ready to start turning Doug loose on drawing lines and Mike loose on drawing lines, and then they start that, and by the time you move in and clean the glass and set your stuff on your desk, a year and a half.
Year and a half would be complete.
But
If we act it now.
That's a year and a half from December.
Oh, from December, okay.
But
Yeah, you gotta get the legislature
you got
a chance to prove it.
Yeah.
Summer of 2014.
Yeah. So.
Pardon me?
Summer of 2014.
Summer of 2014.
And, but you also got to put something in their soup in the meantime that has some substance for the legislature to chew on. And so they want to know
But you
that you
can
thought
help
this
us
thing,
with
oh yeah, absolutely. So what they want to know is, have you done enough work to know exactly what you're going to do?
Yeah.
Have you done enough work to know exactly what's going to cost? Because if we're going to pass this, you're going to do it. And whatever we give you, that's all you get.
That's all you're gonna get.
So,
But
busy fall.
if the decision's not made before December, or before November, and we miss the legislature this time, then we're one more year down the road.
If you choose to go the legislative route.
Right, yeah.
There's a full
the
year
income
here.
tax piece, right.
Yeah,
It's a full year.
you're gonna go to the impact.
Pretty much. I think you need to talk to lobbyists that it's
So they got attack from now on. You're gonna go the income tax route.
correct.
We got just a small little window, guys.
Or you wait a year,
Huh?
or you wait a year.
Or you wait a year, yeah, I know. I say
So-
either get it now and go with less than what they're talking about 4% instead of 6. You wait and you pick up 6 next year or better, or whatever it is. Whatever it takes, of course, the more money it's gonna cost. If you look at them 8 people that they're talking about, if you want to improve the jail, you're looking at another $500,000 a year you have to pay out. That's in benefits and all the rest for these guys, so it's just a no-win situation for that one, in my opinion.
To go back to your question, while you was talking and Doug was answering, I ran a couple numbers. And I think a pretty conservative assessment, once the day you move in, if all things are static to what they are now, those beds are available, and they haven't choked us down with defalons and all those kinds of things. And being very conservative with those estimates, you could easily bring $200,000 to $300,000 back into the county a year. And I know several counties doing just that
I average between 70 and 900,000 a year.
on 400 inmates, on a 400 jail.
296.
Now, that doesn't mean that you can't accumulate that money and help pay the debt off, right? Doesn't matter where the money comes from to pay the debt off, does it?
No, you had any additional funds the county had, you can always prepay debt within that window. There's going to be a period of time you can't prepay the debt,
Yeah.
just to create a market for the bonds, but after that time's elapsed, then you can always.
You say, Gary, that's 8 to 10 years, Jim.
8 to 10 years, yeah.
10 years, 10 years, that additional money.
And then you can start prepaying with any source of money.
But do most counties use a combination of funding, maybe a little edit, a little income, a little property tax, or anything, whatever, anything that's got?
There's all shapes and sizes. There's no two alike. I mean, it depends on, I mean, no one wants to raise taxes any more than you have to, so it always makes sense to look at your budget carefully. Are there other resources that you have that can reduce the amount that you have to borrow? And also remember that you're going to have an accumulation because of that coverage. So if anything can be delayed and done out of future revenues, that's another way to better to manage those funds too. So there's all kinds of ways.
So what's the answer to that? Do they add a combination, most of them?
Well, most of them have some kind of combination.
Some kind of combination, that's what I thought.
Like Davies County, they had a county adjusted gross income tax, but then they got an additional cadget tax.
Yeah.
And they used that additional cadget tax, but they also guaranteed the other cadget tax, even though I told them, I don't like to do it that way, but that's what they wanted to do. People don't always listen to me.
Yeah.
Especially when I get down to my hometown, when Davies and Pike County, where I'm from, no one listens to me down there. So, but everything's different. Perry County, as I mentioned, they're using a new supplemental tax for their edit, but they had a TIF stream, so they're going to go ahead and use the tax increment revenues to help pay that down a little bit. So everyone's different. They look at their own resources and ways to kind of put things together that make sense for them, and there is no way, one size fits all.
Gary, if you fund a project like this with income tax and then you back it up with property taxes, what's that savings traditionally on your interest rate? Because basically you're using it kind of like a cosigner on a loan.
There's two components to that. One, I didn't really talk too much about, is the need for a debt service reserve. So typically, you have a pure income tax revenue bond. We have to take 1 year's revenue and set that aside as a reserve. You've got one edit bond outstanding that doesn't have a reserve, and that's because we were able to negotiate with Harris Bank, and they didn't require it. So we just got lucky. But typically, you have to have a full debt service reserve to do that. So that's 1 year's payment you've got to borrow. So it eliminates that. As far as the interest rate, it probably buys down your rate maybe one step on interest rates, and you're probably saving 20 basis points. Or 20 basis points or 0.2%. But the key to it is to make sure it's designed in such a way that there's very minimal, non-existent chance of ever using it. It's really an insurance policy. And if you can't say it with a straight face, then you legally can't do it. Because if you can't say it with a straight face, then you have to go through a different process. And that's why we want to see that coverage in there.
Good, very good. Very workable. These guys got to work it out. There's the head man right here.
What is the process for the county to go ahead with a project or not to do it or whatever? Commissioners start with it or council or?
Well, I think everyone has, actually attorneys need to be answering these questions instead of me, but it takes two. So the county commissioners have to be on board. They need to be, because they're the ones that are responsible for the contracts, moving things forward. The council has the fiscal responsibility, so they would have to adopt the tax. So everyone would have to be on board with that process.
Good. Do they have to have meetings for public or what?
These are all, there's public meetings where these are all adopted.
Where does the sheriff get involved in this? A lot of this is for him, and he just sat over in the corner and not even contributing.
He's in the catbird seat.
He runs it for you.
How
do they figure you guys
one step I'll add to your
You're just
question
taking care of
is
community.
somewhere if you're thinking about going for a bump in your edit tax, in your income tax, this discussion has to be had with your legislator.
Yeah.
And because he's the guy that's going to carry the freight for you, and that should happen sooner rather than later. And that's something we would do under what we've already been contracted to do. Yeah. We would sit down and have that conversation with him because he's got to buy in. If he doesn't buy in, you're
we're dead no matter what.
at least on that approach.
You got to go to another answer.
Is it a rep or a senator? Or does it matter?
I don't think
The taxes started
Got to go
now.
for a consulate.
to the house?
You might think it does, but I guess I'm an accountant, so
Yeah.
these are legal questions, but I'm pretty sure.
When they tear out.
So the typical process is this.
How logical is it to get turned down? I mean, how many, you know, probably not
If there's-
non-existent. Huh?
If there's not local support for the project, if the locally
Oh, yeah,
elected
they're gonna
officials aren't
look
in
at it, if you
favor
got
of it,
local
then that's
support. In
not
other words, if you don't have the public behind you, they're gonna turn down anything.
Right.
And that's usually when it gets turned down, if it does.
And it's got the local elected officials that play a key part. They have to,
Pardon me?
the locally elected officials, they play a key part.
Oh, sure.
In that support.
That's their job, yeah.
And you want to have this same discussion in more than one public forum, where more than 20 of us that hear it,
Yeah.
and make it available to people for
Yeah.
a short period of time. But typically, the way the county government works, as you guys well know, on something like this, if the commissioners are in charge of the building, they would come to the council and say, we want to do this project.
Yeah.
And this is how we think we can do this. We can pull from this pot, that pot, whatever. And then they bring it to the council, and the council says, well, okay, or not okay. And if it's okay, then we kind of like this arrangement a little bit better. Once they pass on it, then you turn guys like Gary and us and bond attorneys loose to try to figure out all the unravel. In the meantime, you've got to bring that legislator in close and educate him and just
You gotta open it.
got to love on him and let him, give him the constant, give him the confidence that the community is
The
behind
only way you're gonna love
us.
on it is that the community's gotta be a part of it.
That's, you got it.
That's number one.
That's it.
Community a part of it, then you love on it.
Yeah.
I understand. I understand it, Brother Graham.
Yeah. So,
Brad.
we're at the end of our stuff. It's all about what you guys want to do, what the next step is, and this team's available to you guys to help you get this thing wherever you want to go with it. And if this coming what you would hear is my experience is if you get this in front of legislator in December, you would get your answer back before April, but probably May or April. That's kind of what it's working in, right?
Yeah, that's it, we have to go to the,
How have other counties gone about promoting it, soliciting input from the taxpayers?
I think it'd be really important, Mike, that we had multiple public meetings scheduled in different places at different times.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've all done multiple times before. And go through a very similar project, similar presentation like we did these last 2 nights.
But we have to get people here. You know, we've had roughly 40 people here in 2 nights. Well,
Yeah, but was it never posted? I never seen it in the paper yet. I wouldn't know if Jane didn't tell me.
Well, what we generally see when we have these
I don't
is
think it was
folks
posted, was it?
they generally don't attend them.
You didn't put it in the paper, did you?
I don't think so.
Pardon?
these are supposed to-
Well,
Oh, they were,
that's when
it was done.
We don't want to do that.
So it was not in the paper. You guys stay posted in the paper?
This is in the paper.
County posted? Under briefs in the paper. Yeah. When?
Last week.
Because I never seen it. That's what, last week?
Yeah, it went early last week.
Early last week, huh?
Wednesday or Thursday?
I missed it.
I don't know what day it came
Yeah,
out.
it was.
It was posted last week sometime.
We sent it, okay, Kokomo tip. And we had Kokomo.
Yeah, you had Courthouse out there, I guess. But you had it in more papers, huh, last week? Oh, I missed it.
Well, you know, we don't have a newspaper representative tonight. We had one last night.
Yeah.
It would be helpful
Yeah.
if these meetings were reported on
Yeah.
I will tell you
to
that
help generate the discussion.
this meeting will be reported in Kokomo Trib, this Trib, right?
Yes.
Tomorrow.
Last night's well.
He wrote the article
Yeah,
today.
last night's it. Yeah, Ken, Elvestine will take care of that part. Stand here, we got nothing.
I think one of the primary impetus behind the public meeting should be what we talked about last night, the can and should. Here's why we're doing this.
Yeah.
And I don't think it will, particularly on the jail side, which is what I have some knowledge about, it won't take a whole lot to prove the need to do that. And then the second piece of that is we're going to build what we need to meet our needs not only now, but in the future. It's not going to be this monstrosity. It's going to be a very efficient building that is going to be has the least square footage cost that we could possibly build.
We get two other quotes on this.
So all we gotta get it kind of nice, so everybody can see it, you know.
And I would reduce the two nights we
I wish I knew what day it was, when we get that paper, so
We get all in. If we have public meetings, we want to put both nights into one meeting, bring it all together.
Yeah.
The reason we didn't want to do it is because there's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of information, and besides that, Gary wasn't available last night, so. But that really wasn't the reason. But, we want to break it up. Give you guys a chance to think about what we talked about.
Well, yeah.
Chew on it just a little bit.
It's hard to get it presented at all, including the price, and then try to bring us back to talk about it, get everything out.
Well, and, just the fatigue factor of a lengthy meeting, just somewhere along the line, by the time we get down to Gary, they're all checked out. And they're looking for the back page, saying, well, what's the bottom line?
And if you would like, the three commissioners were here last night, if the council would like something similar to
Yeah,
this,
they should be
we
good.
gladly would do that at your convenience, collectively, individually, however you want to do that.
If a project like this is gonna go forward, do most communities have like a little task force or group that kind of stays on it? Because I'm thinking, on a couple of our slides, we had $250,000 for land acquisition. If the fairground location was chosen, that's gone.
Right.
We talked about a basement. Do you want a basement or do we not? I mean, those kinds of things that could work in. I know the architect and the engineers at some point would need that.
The answer to that is yes, and there's two phases to that. There's two charrettes, if you will. One of them will be in the initial planning stages. What is this thing going to look like? What's the capacity? What capacity do we have as the elected officials? And then the second one, once all of those parameters are identified, then we'll sit down with the individual stakeholders, just similar to what we've done during this initial study, and talk through the details of this room sizes, colors, shapes, sizes, external facades. So everyone will have buy-in into every one of those decisions. So you won't just turn this loose and let us run. You will be making those decisions as we go through the process.
That gives us a work list until you get the public to pick out a site, because you're gonna have a problem just going to a site.
Well, at the end of the day,
All
elected
these sites that
officials-
you gave us, the public should be able to pick out one. They
I think
can
they should have some input.
or a majority of the public should be able to. Now you can do something.
Well, we've got a gentleman shows up and says, I got my bike.
Well, actually, it's just not our property.
Okay.
We have a county ordinance that says
So we got to go.
over 25.
So, but those opportunities are going to, we weren't publicly broadcasting, what we were looking at the time.
No.
But when you begin to look, there's all kinds of opportunities going to crop up. Some of those in that selection process, you may have 15, 20 opportunities. Some of those, are not going to meet the basic criteria. You're really not going to give them a lot to look at. But then when you get down to that 5 or 6 down there at the bottom line, then
You
you
hold
spend
it what you got.
well, then you
go from there.
and then you spend some time on it. Well, and then that's when you're looking for that input from that group.
This is obvious,
As far as the construction, is there bidding going on? Like if we're gonna do the courthouse, somebody's gonna bid on the elevator, and then there's gonna be some type of process of that, the stairwell or whatever it's broken down into.
There's all bid packets, and they will be for both projects.
Yeah.
Yeah, we set it up and
Local.
depending on how we want to break it up, set it up so that it's publicly bid with specifications. And we oversee all of the bidding and construction and make certain that the bids meet the state law, meet local laws, and make certain that the contractors are all qualified. A big part of our job is during construction, watching what's going on, making certain it stays in the right place.
There's a big bang for our project.
Like with the jail piece, and we've got that one footprint. Is there another company out there that's going to come in and say, well, here's a better layout for you. You should use this one, or why should we go to that one you put up there?
Let me deal with that because he's got an able opinion.
He's biased.
Yeah. Because
But you used to be a sheriff, you were a sheriff.
I work with all of them.
You work with all of them.
And I will tell you, when you're starting talking about jail, you're down to about 3 in the state of Indiana that even qualify to do this,
Construct the design.
to design these type of facilities.
Okay.
Everybody else you're going to talk to either has 1 or maybe 2, or they're wannabes. We don't want no wannabes. We want people that's got the experience. And like I said, when you make that cut it's a pretty shallow pool. And when you're talking RQEW, you're talking, what, 200? 150.
Well, you're gonna do the same thing that he's doing then. You're gonna put it out to bid, the three people that you concentrate on, or the three people that you work with. Or we don't have that choice. In other words, if he's going to the elevator, he's gonna have three people looking at the elevator project and overseeing and all the other stuff with
With the
courthouse.
contractors?
With the courthouse. Now, would you do the same with the jail? Would you've got three that you like. Would you put it out to the three people?
You mean to those design firms?
Yeah, no, the three.
Or our contractors?
Either way, you said three, what did you say? Design?
I'm just saying, when you're
Which
talking.
one were you talking about?
Okay, well, if I'm talking about the jail, okay?
Contractors or designers?
Designers.
Oh, designers, okay.
And that's ultimately the commissioner's choice as a professional service.
And yeah, but your pool of qualified people is pretty shallow.
Yeah, you said that, yeah.
And so, from that standpoint, when it comes to Mike on professional service for this building, Mike is involved in this because I know what he does, and I know what he can do, and as we pulled this team together, I pulled what I thought was the best.
Yeah.
It's not my decision.
I designed over 50 different courthouses at
Yeah,
different
yeah,
parts
that's
of
what I
the
say, you
throughout
need
the
to know
state,
that.
both federal and county
Yeah, I know.
courthouses.
And I worked with both these companies for many years. I worked with others too, and had successful projects.
Yeah.
But this team came together because
There's another dimension of this too, that, and I'm listening to, like what was in Perry County, they had a jail committee. And on that committee, they had the sheriff, they had the prosecutor, they had the judge, some of the county councils, some of the county commissioners, and a couple others that were well-respected citizens. And they went through a lot of that vetting process. And, so they looked at all different options and so forth, and kind of made recommendations. And then there's the relationship between the architect and the construction manager are kind of friends and foe a little bit, because the architect comes up with ideas and the construction manager says, well, I don't think that's a good idea. I think, what if we did this because we could save some money? So there is some, I'm not taking, this is my observation as an accountant.
Yeah.
There is some checks and balances in the process between construction manager and architect.
I like your checks and balances.
Which brings the
better than
contract to
friends
the
and
customer.
Right, because everybody's trying to get to the same point.
Yeah, because what I'm thinking is that if we went with that design and we said that's what we're gonna do, and in 2 years, somebody else comes and goes, well, here was the design you should have used, and this is better, it's more efficient, or it runs this way, or runs that way. I mean, sell me on that one and tell me why that's the one that we need here versus what somebody else has. So it's our number of staffing, it's our footprint, we got, whatever it is, cost of, that's the answer, because next week, somebody else might come in and say, well, no, this is a better solution for
And
it.
a good deal of that process, Brad, has to be done before you go to the legislature.
Yeah.
Because you got to know what you're planning on building. Now, I will tell you, when you start looking at square footages, there is certain things in that building that are subjective to the sheriff's input, the county input. But when you get into handling inmates and you get into dealing with supporting inmates and those kinds of things, those numbers are locked in. And so many square foot per inmate, and you decide what kind of administrative activities you're going to have, kind of the size of your intake process, and you get to decide some degree of visitation, what works for those kinds of things. But by and large, how many people we're going to house in this facility, bang. And the other thing is, we want to make sure that if we have to expand, that decision we make at 7,500 people will facilitate that expansion if we ever have to do it. I'll tell you, that expansion doesn't take a lot to facilitate, but it's there nonetheless. But those are the kind of decisions. All this inmate handling stuff, it's kind of locked in by ACA.
We talked about expanding the actual holding areas, but what about the administrative? Is there an easy expansion for that?
Well, you mean in the existing facility?
No, in what must be proposed.
We program some very basic space in there, and we're sitting here and talking to the sheriff and his staff as to what that might be. And again, it's really consolidated space. There is not a more efficient building out there than a modular steel cell. There just is not. Based primarily on construction costs, we won't know truly what those are until those bids go out, the bid packets go out. But there is not a more efficient construction process than modular steel cells.
I don't think we'd be looking at the different size, but maybe the materials used would be cheaper with somebody else. I mean, I don't know.
well, that's kind of
I don't think you'd want to cut the size down. I mean, because there's a certain requirement for each cell and all the rest of that stuff. And then you remove, you need to move around. I understand all that stuff. I think everybody in here does. But, you know, if you're taking three different people that do the construction part of it, if they use better material, and it's cheaper, or that kind of
the
thing.
design process, these guys will take you, say, through some opportunities. If we use brick, it's gonna be in this. If we use stone, if, you know, all these different, and so those choices are made. That's given to me for kind of a check and a balance to all that. And so at those opportunities to lessen the cost are in that design process. And that, a lot of that's gonna happen sooner rather than later.
We're currently at 10,000 feet.
Yeah.
We're currently at 10,000 feet. If there's a decision, that even the thought of moving this project forward, we
got a
need
lot
to
of
take
work
a
to
deep
do.
dive into this project and create a whole lot more detail for you.
Oh, okay.
The other
Something
thing,
tangible, a hardboard that'll show you what this thing could look like for that amount of money.
I see.
the other thing I want you guys to understand is in this program space of what, 38,000 square feet, we talked to the sheriff and we had a discussion amongst ourselves. We can bring EMA into that facility, give them some office spaces, and be a pretty good cohabitant because they need training area, we have it. You know, they need storage area, we have it. They're all need, so office space is easily addable and those kinds of things. So if you sit and say, we want to build us an EMA center, you don't need to have that to have dispatch because you've already got your dispatch relocated. But if you want to have an EMA center better than our little, what we have, then, you know, you're talking some pretty significant dollars to be able to create a lot of that space, which we already have in this building. And we've already captured that center. So.
I think when I told him, Brad, I told him that DMA ought to have the director of DMA should have an office in there where it's got like a joint room with the sheriff where they could have like a sit-down center if they need to go over whatever they have to go over and stuff. So it's one thing that I did tell him, we don't have an EMA center other than.
But he's got a squad training. He'll have a squad training area and education space that is adequate, more than adequate to run an EOC out of in the event of any, which, you know, you kind of got that makeshift put up to there now. But that, all you do is you build in the technology to do it. When they come in, they plug in.
Similar with the relationship that could happen with the city of Tipton.
Exactly.
Which makes lots of sense.
What would we do with our old jail?
That's just what I was going to bring up. That should be raised as soon as the project's done.
Yeah, you
Because what's
can
going to happen
try
is you're going to step in there and say, wait a minute, it's a historical building and we got to start doing all that kind of improvement for nothing. It needs to be raised at the end of the construction, or we're going to be in trouble. They want to put a new roof on, they want to keep it, you know,
That's all you
historical.
take off.
For what? For an empty building?
Because part of that jail is, the old jail is still there.
Yeah.
The historical part of it with the sheriff's house and the jail part where the
Better
cells
raise
used to be, it's still there. You can take off the cell blocks, that's all you're gonna take off of that until they get it changed.
There's an opportunity to use that space for support people like they're using it for now, and also possibly community corrections can operate out of that, and they don't need all of it, but they can use some of it. And the reason we didn't dive into that is because those options are wide open at this point. And that's an option. That's an option. It depends on how much restriction you're going to run into.
It costs money to be a historical building thereafter, and a waste of money, in my opinion. Because you're not going to leave it.
For trade to Mark for his property.
It all depends on your public sentiment development.
Yeah, I know.
Just trade it. Maybe we trade it to the guy that's got one of the properties, so we can just trade properties with him.
That's not a bad idea.
You can turn that down.
What a deal.
Give you some good tax.
Yeah, that's right. There's some tax incentives there, Mark.
Yeah, Mark, we're sending them out.
But as you can see, those kinds of things need to be talked about sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Because you got to have a plan together when you go to this legislature. And we have time to do that. I mean, the time we've got now, we have time.
A month or so.
Very detailed.
So we can get there on both facilities in time for hand out
Or
to.
November.
Already September.
Huh?
Already September.
That's what I'm saying, we got a month to that's it. What you're gonna need to do is present this thing to the public place, take it to the county council once, and go from there. That's my opinion,
Who makes the final decision on this site? Where does that?
The county commissioner will make that decision. And our job is to provide as many options as we can.
And
And make
analyze
the
it.
educated choice.
Yeah, right. Analyze it, get it.
Anybody have anything else?
That's why I say, oh, guys, we gotta move on from here.
Every day's that.
No. We gotta push the money, we gotta keep going.
So, in recap of what we kind of talked about, we got if there's a desire to move forward, we've got a discussion with commissioners, possibly the council, also a discussion about pulling together a committee for input. Then we need to sit down and talk to an attorney who can confirm all the stuff that we've talked about here tonight, which,
You're gonna pass this, they use farms and farms.
Barnes and Thornburg, I spent all.
I didn't know. We didn't know about this.
Now, which they can do that. But they're ultimately, they're the ones that have to render the opinion on the bond issue, and they're the ones that's gonna lead us through all the legal hoops to get to where.
Well, he can help too, right? You can help through
On the
that.
accounting part,
Huh?
on the financial part.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Help on what.
They work, he'll work, as we all work very closely with, as a team,
Yeah.
to get to where we gotta get.
Right.
And we're fortunate, Destin and Business is with us.
Well, that's what I say, we got him here. Turn him over to the council and decide what they want to do. Which way they're gonna go.
Did you ever look to see site-wise how many acres you actually need
Well,
with growth potential?
you need to be thinking 5+. Because you see what happens on these 2 or 3 acre sites, it gets very confined, it limits your ability to.
So 5 to 7 acres.
The old one that we picked out 10 years ago, and still are working on the seed building, probably the one.
A couple counties,
That's 5
they impound lots, that, you know, to take that load off of where we were putting stuff and paying for it. Takes a little bit more acreage to do those kinds of things, but you're talking 5 to 7 acres, that's plenty to get done and expand what we're talking about.
It'll be done for a long time.
A long, long time.
And that belongs to the city too, doesn't it? And if you haven't seen it.
Yeah. well,
Didn't that go back on taxes?
Paul Hawkins owns it.
Oh, I thought it went back on taxes. Did Hopkins has got it yet?
Did he buy it in tax sale?
I don't know.
That went back on taxes at one time, you didn't buy it.
Might have got gone.
I
A
thought
couple
we,
months ago, that's what the sign was on the fence. What else can we, anything else helpful, good information?
yes, sir, excellent. Very good, good job.
Yes, we can.
One more time.
Just a review. For everybody that eats. This one, we had the final figures.
I don't know if we should set up a meeting with you or.